music theory in popular music? Well, the first thing I want to talk about there is that there is music theory in popular music. Music works. It has a structure. There is a way things fit together. Even if you are just randomly picking chords, your ear tells you some chords work better than others. Then you get to why. Why does that work? And once you understand why, things start to speed up. So popular music uses chords, it uses scales, it has melody, it has rhythm, it has meter. It has everything that you will learn in music theory. Let's go on to the first section on this. Music theory is the study of the structure of music. That's all it is. It can get in depth. You can go off the deep end in music theory, but you can go off the deep end in gear, which a lot of you have. You can go off the deep end in tablature. You can go off the deep end in anything. But the smart way to do this is to take a look at what music theory is. Take a look at what part of it applies to you and make sure you know that. And then once you have that, a good grasp on that, then you can move on to branching out a little bit later. But first, fill in the gaps first. We just talked about that. My next note was, even if you just randomly connect some chords and get lucky, there's a reason why they complement each other. I was already talking about that before, but it's worth repeating. You've played a D chord, and then you may have been trying different chords out, and then all of a sudden found that A chord. Oh, that was the one I was looking for. That's the sound that I heard in my head. Well, there's a reason why that sound was in your head. You've heard it in other songs, and the relationship between the D chord being the main chord and the A chord, in this instance being the 5 chord. We'll talk about why it's the 5 chord halfway through today's podcast, and why going from the 5 chord back to the 1 chord has a emotional response. It's a pleasing sound. Now you can deviate from music theory. A lot of people do. You can, and especially in popular music. I took classical music theory first, and it tended to, there was a little bit more structured, a lot more structured, really more structured. And it would go into some things that really didn't apply to popular music, but that was okay. I was interested in it as well. But the basics of classical music theory is the same. And what we find out is that just because something is done all of the time and is a common practice does not have to be used all of the time. You can deviate from music theory on purpose if you want. It's used as tension. You can try a chord that doesn't quite work, and maybe that shocks people. Maybe that brings the listener's attention, or it could just sound wrong too. It could go either way with that. It's all how, it's the attitudes, how you use it, right? So just knowing music theory doesn't mean you're stuck. Doesn't mean that you have to do things exactly like everyone else says. You can change things up. I remembered in school, there was a lot of composers there, and there was jazz composers and classical composers, and there was modern classical composers, and a lot of them would make songs, make music using random sets of tones, of notes that didn't have anything to do with each other. But they would get this group, or maybe they did, maybe they had a little bit to do with each other. Maybe they were kind of close, or maybe some of them weren't. But they would create chords, they would create melodies, they would create parts, all from these random sets of tones, and use them in a different way. Not conventional at all, but very cool sounding music and very pleasing. But what music theory tries to get us to do is to start thinking diatonically. So diatonic, what does that mean? You think diatonic, you think two, right? Diatonic, but it's not. It just basically means you take the scale and you can build chords from the notes in the scale. The scale creates the relationships for all of the chords in a key and for the scales that you use on them. It's the family. Diatonic thinking is thinking in family and matching things in a family. Because I learned chords first when I was playing guitar, learning guitar, I assumed something. I assumed that everything that I was learning revolved around the chords because that's what I was taught first. I thought this is the basis, and I was trying to build all of my knowledge around chords. But then when I did that, when I tried to relate everything to chords, I had a mess on my hands. Nothing seemed to work out quite right. Everything, I couldn't see how everything related. When I started learning a little bit about music theory, it taught me that scales come before chords. If you've heard some of the early shows here, I ask you a question: what came first, chicken or the egg? Right? And in that instance, it's you don't know. It's a question with no answer. But in music, if you ask what comes first, scales or chords, scales always come first. Chords are built from scales. And when you realize that chords are made from scales, everything falls into place, and it did for me. Each degree of the scale I learned can create a chord by the simple process of taking that note and skipping one and skipping the other. Those are the three notes that match really well. Very simple. Anyone can take any scale you have, start on the first note, skip a note, go to the third of that scale, skip another note, go to the fifth of that scale. You have the first note, third note, fifth note. There's a triad right there. Super easy. These chords that we create, and you can do that from every note of the scale, these are family members. They're the diatonic family members. Once I learned that, everything opened up. Oh, okay. There's a ground floor to this, and I can take this ground floor and I can start building upon that. And that's, if you've listened to this podcast, you know this. We're all about building from the bottom, from the ground floor, and then branching up. In blues and in rock and popular music, things work out a little bit differently, though. I started taking a look at that, and it's using diatonic chords, but it's using them in a different way. Usually in diatonic, the one chord is a major chord of some sort, a major triad, major seventh chord in jazz, or a minor. If you're using the natural minor scale, it would be that's your basic, tonic chord. But in blues, all we do is we change something. The sound of the dominant seventh chord. I'll do one in A here. Right? Then I go into the 4 chord here. Yep. And then eventually you come up to the 5 chord. Back to the 4 chord, back to the 1 chord. I didn't go through all the chords, but that's the basic. Those are the 3 chords in the blues. So our tonic chord, our starting chord, is not a major triad at all. It's not a major seventh. It's a dominant seventh chord. It's a bluesy sound. It's a tense sound. You hear that? The flat seventh is in there. It wants to go somewhere. This tension went along with the feeling of blues. It's a sound that we've become accustomed to. In the beginning of blues, I don't know this, I wasn't alive at that time, but I would assume that people who weren't used to hearing blues and heard that dominant seventh chord as the very first chord of the song, they would probably think that would get their attention. That would make those listeners go, oh, this is either good or bad, but definitely different, right? So we take the theory, diatonic family of chords and scales, and then adding that dominant 7 as the 1 chord, man, things just go to town from there. The next thing that I discovered along the way was when learning rock music, I would learn bar chords, mostly really power chords, where I didn't know whether it was a major chord or a minor chord. I just knew that it was in the key that we've been doing A. We'll just say A. That was confusing to me. Well, if you're going to play a bass line, if you're going to play a lead over this, how do I know what to play? Then I just started, then through music theory, I started taking a listen to the vocal line from there. And what notes is the singer singing over these chords? And that would almost always result in a minor scale of some sort. The singer was singing a minor scale. So I'm learning these hard rock songs. They've got power chords. I didn't know, what to play over them, but the singer was singing minor. So in popular music, we would take minor chords, chord progressions, remove the third, remove the note that tells us whether it's happy or sad, strip them down to power chords, but then other parts, other players in the song, other instruments, the singer could establish the sound of the whole thing, the minor sound there. I thought it was very interesting and something that can be used really to your advantage in a lot of different lines. Hey, thanks for watching. I've got something for you. It's my free practice routine mini course. It's called Get Moving Guitar, and you can get it by clicking the link below in the description. If you would like to support the podcast and get more of this content that's actually designed to help you become the guitarist that you always wanted to be, sign up for my VIP supporter program. For as little as $3 a month, you get access to my private VIP podcast. And I will see you soon in the next video.